Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. This is episode 10. So we have hit a milestone, and just want to say thanks everybody who's been there with us up until this episode 10. But let's meet the panel today, starting with Kel. How you doing, Kel?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back.
Absolutely. Good to have you back, Kel. Dr. Silkman, how's it down under?
So far, so good, Jeff, and welcome to my fellow panelists, and welcome to everyone in chat. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you back, Dr. Silkman. And Jack, how's it going there in Michigan? How's the weather?
It's going, fall time in Michigan. It's cool and cold at times, but love the fall weather. Hello to all the panelists, and hello to everyone in live chat. Let's get it on.
Well, speaking of cooler than the other side of the pillow, Big Jeff, how are you doing today?
It was a beautiful day today in Massachusetts, but the temperature's dropping like a rock. It's that time of year where, you can have a nice warm day and then freeze your butt off at night. And it's great to be back. It's good to be back wearing a sweater. Sometime I'll be able to get my camera going, and you can see that we're back in our warm clothes. And I see that we're looking at a picture of the back of the RAV, and there's no sign of a blunt instrument. So I was going to ask Jack where that was, if you might have seen that laying around.
I heard about it, Big Jeff, but that son of a bitch just disappeared on us, man.
Where the heck did it go? I'm ready to go. Let's go, Jeff.
All right, let's go. So we're just going to finish off episode 2 today. So finally, Dr. Silkman gets his wish.
Stop teasing me there, Jeff.
That light is connected to the murder.
I think what we need to do is try to link. Somehow we have to get a link of her to the people at that quarry, somebody in that quarry, why she would be there, what would make, and then if we can find that could lead us to motive.
Right.
And someone's going to have to tell us. We're going to have to keep talking to people.
Yeah.
And someone may know that we haven't hit on that isn't making the connection.
Well, and a lot of people, I think they just heard her cars on Avery's property and her bones are there. So what's there to talk about?
Yeah.
I mean, why would anybody think back about some connection to the quarry unless we can develop
Right.
that lead?
There's tons. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and there's just so many misconceptions about this, and they started rattling out, well, what about this? And I'm like, that didn't happen. This didn't happen. So people have misconceptions,
Yeah.
It's very interesting hearing the investigators talk, and I'm sure the panel will back me up here. It's all about impressions, isn't it, guys? Because, Kathleen and her researchers have uncovered all the information regarding the dog tracks and the fact that the dogs had spent a lot of time actually off the property rather than on the property. And also, of course, the cremains, the human cremains that unfortunately Dr. Eisenberg refused to classify. But as we come to hear or find out later on, there were indeed cut, burnt human cremains that were found in the quarry. And remember what Mr. Kratz said in court? I'm only going to spend 20 seconds talking about the cremains in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. And he even said he doesn't regard it as evidence. So it's very interesting about impressions.
Absolutely. I think, the question I would ask Dr. Silkman is, how much time did they spend in that quarry? But Ken Kratz only wants to mention it for 20 seconds. Like, that's the ratio that I'm interested in, right? Lots of time spent over there, but don't look over here.
They spent days over there. Remember, they were already in the area, probably pilfering around by the 6th, going in definitely into Cuss Road on the 7th. That's a whole different matter. They kept looking and they kept looking. Remember the phone call from Sipple on the 9th. First phone call was at, I don't know when it was going on 2:00 in the afternoon, going down to whatever in the quarry. 2:12 p.m. He's calling Captain Rush. I found all these bones. I need people. I need help. Come on. And no reports really not really align with his phone call. There is a report, but it doesn't. It really doesn't align with his phone call. So.
Yeah, there's two dispatch calls that really align well with what you just said, Jack. One of them is where they say, "Oh yeah, we've expanded the search radius by 2 to 3 miles."
That's right.
A mile is a long way, right? A mile. And the second one is, "Oh yeah, we're finding buckets of bones." So, those somehow didn't make their way, and as Dr. Silkman said, none of those made their way into the trial. So, It wasn't worth 20 seconds, but it was worth a good heck of a search, right? Eisenberg couldn't be bothered to try and identify the remains after all that looking. Just goes to show you that all the cops probably weren't in on the frame, they just had to selectively choose the evidence that they needed to implicate Stephen Avery, and that was it. That's all. They stopped looking and researching after that.
Yep, 100% agree. And these guys, Kathleen Zorn and her researchers and investigators, must be really scratching their head, because as you can hear, what the gentleman was just saying, that they had spoken to some of the jurors, and they had no idea or concept about the importance of the cremains that were found in the Manitowoc County gravel pit. And of course, Jack 61, there's no mention of the cremains and bones that were found at Cuss Road, right? Right, Jack 61?
Absolutely not. No, well, other than Fallon's report, which slid by everyone somehow, but that's right. No mention.
Correct. So, in other words, it's the way you steer an investigation, and it's the way you present information in a trial that's so important. And of course, Zona and her investigators are just showing the shenanigans that were carried out in court.
Well, what about this? And I'm like, that didn't happen. This didn't happen. So people have misconceptions.
Yeah.
Well, even talking with some of the jurors we've spoken with, and we asked them about the quarry and the relevance in the trial, and I didn't really know it had much relevance. It was barely mentioned.
Yeah, it's barely mentioned. The defense attorneys don't mention that. I mean, there's 9 dog handlers, and there's probably 5 to 6 scent hounds, and then the cadavers, and they're all over in the quarry, So I think what we got to do on her is we've got to find people that were close to her that will talk to us.
It'll be her friends, or that'll tell us.
Agree.
It won't. It'll come from her friends.
Kathleen, she makes me feel like she cares about her clients, what they're going through and everything. When you got a lawyer that cares about you, that's the lawyer is good, is do something for you, get the truth out and get what happened.
Remember that?
Was that vehicle there at that time?
The hunters said that it was, but then they noticed it was pushed over into your property. Because I said to Stephen, it's only got that one tire on it. How would you guys move it?
Yeah.
And he said, you could just use a car to push it.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking,
there was nothing in this thing. It was gutted. It's only a shell.
So it's just the body of the car and everything else.
That would make it really.
That's an interesting point there that they discover here with Earl, that there was no engine in that car, and that makes the planting of the RAV through the back a little bit more plausible. That's how I feel when I see this. I think that Earl was a good insight here.
The cat was already out of the bag, right, guys? Because remember what Fassbender said to Stephen when he was arrested on November the 9th. Fassbender actually told Stephen exactly where the RAV came from, right? And it came from the quarry through the back way. And what is interesting is that Fassbender told him they followed the dog tracks, right, guys? They followed the dog tracks. So they already had a concept of how that RAV4 came onto the property.
Exactly what he said to Stephen, 100%. We know how you got the RAV in there. We know how it came in.
Yep, 100%.
Until Brendan said they drove it down past Chuck's, and then they knew something different.
100% correct. And you know what? I mean, I know we're sort of like projecting fast forward here, but it's rather remarkable that on November the 9th, Fassbender and Wiegert were telling Stephen how they believed that the RAV4 got in situ where it was. And then later, when they were interrogating Brendan Dassey, he told them a completely different story. And of course, there were no dog tracks or major dog tracks coming down the path that Brendan told them, right, during the interrogation. Yet all the dog tracks, the majority of the dog tracks, were certainly from the quarry area leading up to where the RAV4 was eventually found. So Fassbender and Wiegert had to have known that Brendan Dassey couldn't have possibly been telling them the truth.
Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I believe that there's a spot on Teresa's RAV4 with some potential red paint. And isn't that car that they're showing right there red in paint color? That's all. Maybe
the I think Jack 61 put up a picture, or Kelly, looking at the blinker light. The blinker light, Kathleen Zorner believes, is a part of the murder process, has something to do with the murder. And I believe Jack 61 put up a picture of the blinker light, and you can clearly see that the blinker light in the back of the RAV4 has got a brown mark or streak on it. Well, guess what, guys? Is that brown streak now present in the pictures that are in CASO, in the CASO report at Jack 61?
Well, what happened is that they repackaged it in 2017 or 2018, and that mark appears to be gone. That mark appears to be gone. I want to know why they repackaged it. Why did they repackage it? I mean, what the hell, man?
Yeah. It looks like the blinker light has actually been clean. And the reason why that is so damning is that someone like microtrace lab analysis could have easily analyzed, say that was paint. They could have determined what type of paint it was, the actual color, and maybe even traced it back to a vehicle. And that's what's happening now with the discussion between Kathleen Zellner and Earl. So that's very, very interesting.
And why didn't they fingerprint it? That should have been the first thing.
100%. Totally agree with that. I think the point that I was making about the red paint actually wasn't on the light, but it was lower. It was on the bumper part of her car. I'll see if I can dig that picture up and slide that in here.
I think I've got it. I'll find it for you.
But I think that's the one that I was trying to make a connection to. And yeah, the light, absolutely, guys. Like, I'm totally with you on the light, but I was trying to make the connection of the red paint on the, is that the Pinto? I forget what car that was. The red car that was Pinto, that was potentially pushed out of the way, that had no engine in it, that basically any car could push the Pinto out of the way with no engine in it, as long as the emergency brake wasn't, enabled.
I've got that photo too.
Oh, absolutely. Share that, and I'll toss those in here so people know what we're referring to. But I just think, like, there's not a lot of instances in this case where you get sort of obvious, evidence. Like, to me, it looks like, oh, that could definitely be related. Red car, red paint, boom, boom. Like, that's just how my mind works. And I know that criminology doesn't always work that way, but that's where my mind goes on this one.
On the inside was all cut out. They were going to make something out of it. I don't know.
So it wouldn't have been hard.
But there was no motor in it, no tranny in it, no nothing.
So it would have been light then to push.
Right. Yeah. Show him her car.
Here's a good one where you can really see like that damage there.
Oh, yeah.
And then it goes all the way up onto the hood.
Mm-hmm.
But that smudge right there might be that.
That's what I'm thinking.
That might be this bumper here.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
It'd be the right height
from
too.
an angle.
I mean, the top of this bumper, that could be that mark right there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I want to figure out what that berm, because I feel like that's where they came through. We spend a lot of time on those scent dogs tracking in the quarry.
That's where they're really hitting is that quarry.
And then there were bones over there.
Mm-hmm.
Better to know either.
Yeah. No, there was a pelvis over there.
Okay.
And there's a lot of stuff over there. So we're gonna follow Chuck.
sort of, I'm looking at Chuck and I'm thinking to myself, Jack 61, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And it's sort of like, have a look at his responses. Oh, yeah, they found the pelvis over there. And he just nods his head. Uh-huh. There were a lot of things over there. Oh, boy. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if Kathleen Zellner should be actually telling him all this sort of stuff, because he looks a bit stunned.
That's an interesting take, Dr. Silkman. I think like the fact that we were just talking about how Ken Kratz and the other district attorneys didn't want to talk about the quarry, and then they're like, oh yeah, and pelvic bone was found there. What? What? That seems like a kind of a big deal. You know what I mean? It seems like kind of maybe a big deal for, you know, a missing woman, right? That's it. That's
interesting. Kelly, I'm not sure if Kelly would like to comment, but she did some excellent research regarding potential other suspects who were interviewed in CASO. Kelly, you want to make a couple of quick comments about who was number one on their potential list?
Yeah, so I did a breakdown of, I gathered all the information, like tips that came in and how many times people were individually mentioned in CASO as a potential, not a suspect, but like people really believe that they were capable of doing it. And then they kind of gave a history of like what they had done and what they were currently doing. And it was actually Charles Avery that led by a milestone. So he sat at around, I counted 12 tips. So 12 individual people came forward to bring Chuck into it and said, this is, if anyone's going to do it. And this was kind of the entire like common denominator of what they were all saying, which was, if anyone was going to do it on that property, Charles Avery. That was exactly what they were all kind of alluding to. And we have two women that were also interviewed, and they were speaking about the fact that one of them felt like they were being stalked. She was a customer and she met him at the Avery salvage yard, and after that he was going past her house, he was leaving money and flowers on her doorstep, and yeah, so she was really uncomfortable by that. So yes, Chuck came in very strong at 12. Then we didn't. The one underneath him was Stephen Avery, and oh God, I can't really remember now. I think it was Bradley Checks. They both sat, I think, or maybe it wasn't Bradley. There was 5 anyway. There was 5 tips for them. So between, and everyone else sat around, you know, 3, 2, but Chuck led by 12, which was quite in your face in terms of everyone else.
And thank you, Kelly. And that's very interesting because Chuck, I believe he's the owner of that salvage yard, and he would know that place inside out.
Well, and considering the incident list, and Christine and I didn't get every incident, but it's lengthy. Going back to, well, I shared a screenshot just of what I'd ran across last night, and I really wasn't looking for anything Chuck Avery, but it was just on my external drive, and I saw that, and I'm like, we were just talking about him. I'll share a screenshot of that. It's extensive. The guy's got real issues with anger, women, and family. He had real problems with his daughter, Shannon, and it's documented. So, yeah, absolutely. If they're going to look at someone on that property, it should have been him, my opinion.
Well, I think it's fair to say whenever we bring up someone's name that's in the family, it's always in the context of, or in that and there's sort of a lack of investigation done on anybody but Stephen. And it does appear that these other people were uninvestigated when there was as much or more reason to investigate them than Stephen. So I'm not ready to stand here and accuse anybody in the family, and I don't think anybody in the panel is either. But just to highlight the inconsistency of the police investigation. But along those same lines, one of the other things that I've always found interesting on that side is there's a gentleman by the name of Derpinghouse, who I think is maybe Chuck's one of Chuck's either son-in-laws or the brother of one of his son-in-laws, who quoted Chuck as saying, "We burned the bitch."
We're not accusing Chuck of having done anything, but there's two things that stand out for me. In an early statement that he made to the investigators, Chuck had mentioned the fact that if there were gunshots fired on the property, he would have heard them. And that's very interesting because there's no doubt that Teresa Halbach suffered at least 2 gunshots to the head, right? There's no doubt if that's her cranial bone fragments, and I have no doubt that they are. She was shot at least twice in the skull. And Chuck Avery, very early on in a statement to the investigators, mentions gunshots. Now, no one had talked about gunshots, right? And the other interesting thing is the night that he goes off to Crivets with Brendan Dassey in the car, remember Jack 61, he reports seeing lights near his house. Now,
That's right.
If you go back from his property all the way down, that's where the crusher is. And it's also the pathway that leads to where the RAV4 was found. Now, isn't that interesting that Chuck, he phoned up Stephen and said, "Hey, I've seen lights by my place." Now, let's think about it, guys. There should not be any lights at that time of the night back to where the crusher was. There's no way, because I believe the salvage yard closes at about 5 o'clock. So who was driving around in the dark near where the crusher, if that was indeed true?
Of anybody that could have done it, who would have had the easiest time to do it? And it could look at Chuck here. I just want to put it out there just because I feel like it's worthy of saying that I've come to the point now where I don't think that any of the Averys or Dasseys had anything to do with it. I'm taking Alan Avery's angle and saying nothing happened here. Nothing. That's kind of where I'm at. I get to this point where I think everything's just been planted, but that's my own personal view. Anyway, Chuck makes a better suspect than Stephen Avery. And I think that that's the way of looking at it. When you go, if you were going to investigate this crime properly, whose door are you knocking on first? And they went to Stephen instead of maybe going to Chuck, where, Kelly explained it. There's been, people pointing fingers to him, but they go towards Stephen.
I don't believe Chuck had a proper alibi for the time when Teresa Halbach arrived at the property.
He doesn't really. He skipped dinner that night. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. If you're going to make the case, it would be easier to make the case against Chuck than it would against Stephen. Just from the face, just looking at the situation. Who do you ask? Whose door are you going to knock on first? But
I know this is very repetitive, but I just want to say, because I was the one that just went through the Chuck thing, I really want to highlight that I am not accusing him. Just because I went through that he had 12 tips, that was not any form of allegation on my behalf. When I did do the research, I went back to the basics, and I think we're all on the same page here. When they found the RAV on the 5th, I think that we're all under the same, understanding that at that point, until they found alleged or the other evidence, that was open for interpretation for everybody on that salvage yard to then be a suspect, because that RAV was owned by Chuck. There was multiple gentlemen and even women that were living on that salvage yard at the time. Therefore, when I took it back to the beginning, I wanted to see whether they did take that angle. I wanted to see whether they started off the investigation from the moment that RAV was found, whether they were looking directly at just Stephen, or whether they were open to the fact that it could have been someone else on that property. Now, again, this is my interpretation of what I looked into, but it comes across like they did. They were taking notes and reports, and they were listening to all the tips that were coming in about Chuck, And there was a few times in the reports that they started off leading the reports, asking about Chuck first, and then Stephen later. So, and then we obviously know that clearly the key then comes up in Stephen's trailer, and then you can almost see another diversion of a new tunnel vision that began. But again, I know this is very repetitive, but I just want to, on behalf of myself, I do not accuse Chuck Avery. I just was going through the evidence and the reports that are there.
Duly noted, Kel. Thank you. All right, Jack.
I wanted to point. I just wanted to point out. And this is. I'm going back. I'm backing up for a minute because I'm in our chat here. I linked the Pinto, and you can see it. And I've also shared my screen. You don't have to show it if you don't want. But it is curious that if you look at that photo, look at the date. It's 11/16/05, and as far as we know, they cleared the property on the 12th. So what are they doing out on the property taking photos? This is a DCI photo, by the way. Just throwing it out there.
That is an excellent question.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, guys. I really don't know. I don't have an answer for that, and I just requested, specific property tag numbers, and this is one of them. And boom, there are 4 photos in this file. Boom, that's what it was.
The thing is, every single timestamp that I've ever seen on these photos has been accurate on the day that it's been taken. So, if it's off, it's usually off way in the past because the camera battery died or something like that. But it's hardly ever off. I've never seen one off in the future.
I'll have to. I'll have to see if I can. We'll see if I can pull the metadata from this photo while we talk here.
He's going just to the berm, right?
This is where the conveyor road passed through.
Yeah. This berm wasn't up like this. It's totally open.
A roadway with the conveyor that time.
And the conveyor came through.
My property ends right here. Yeah, because they got pieces of the conveyor on the other side yet.
Okay. Whoa, look at that. Let me come down a little bit. Yeah, let me come down. Do you want a hand?
Yeah.
Give me your hand.
There we go. Thank you.
Here, give me your hand.
Thank you.
Okay.
The conveyor
Are
belt
we
look
on
like?
Madonna's property now?
Yeah.
So just point to the old road coming in here.
It was on, let's see here. I'm not sure if it was on the left side.
So I wanted to stop it specifically here because we've talked so much about Conveyor Belt Road. We've talked about, did the RAV come in the front? Did the RAV come in the back? How did the RAV get in there? And if we look at this here, this is what Chuck Avery is pointing at. This is how you would have gotten out into the quarry following this path here. Just to give the viewers kind of an idea of what we're always talking about.
That actually is a very important point because it goes to show how easy it was to come in and out of the property from multiple directions. And the Avery family, that they were concerned, the Avery brothers, they were concerned of a lot of people coming in through the back way and stealing car parts. That's why they blocked off the entrance. And don't forget, Josh Redon lives very, very close. He's got a hunting lodge very, very close. And Stephen often used to make the remark that Josh Redon used to drive down the cornfield from Cuss Road down through his property and up the gravel road and then onto 147. So he actually took a shortcut, right? So they were concerned that people were coming in from the back way, from the quarry, and that's why they blocked off the conveyor road with that Pinto. So it's very, very interesting, as Jack61 pointed out, that someone will be taking a photograph of that Pinto. And that makes sense because their hypothesis at the time was that Stephen had driven the RAV4 back onto the property through the quarry, and they backed that up through the use of the dog tracks. If you have a look at the pictures of how they were in 2005, it was a clear road. It was a clear dirt road. So there were no weeds. There were no weeds at all.
There was a conveyor actually would be emptying where Chuck is standing, would be emptying of the conveyor kind of right there.
There was a conveyor, correct. There are photographs from early 2005 and I think 2006 and 7 when Buting and Strang went there as well. There was an overhead conveyor. All that's gone now.
What Kathleen Zellner is looking at right now, you know, she's not looking at it from what it was back then. She's getting a sense of it is for now. And so although this is really nice for the documentary and we get to see, like I think you just pointed out, Silkman, this is not an accurate representation of what it looked like. So
it's not.
It is what it is.
Not,
you know?
Yeah, it's not what it was like back in 2005. And if you have a look at the connection between Cuss Road and Stevens property, it's now a quarry. There's no road anymore. Whereas back in 2005, there was the cornfield and the direct way to get from Cuss to Stephen and back and forward, of course. Now the landscape is totally changed. So when you're looking at this, you've got to remember how it was like back in 2005.
Side of the right side.
But it came straight in.
Straight from Highway Q.
Right, and you could
down.
come right into your property. There was no berm here, right?
No berm, nothing.
Yeah. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how the car was planted back on the Avery property.
Doesn't exactly fit the her newest version, does it?
No, it doesn't. And there's no doubt that and I'm sure Kelly will step in a second. There's no doubt that the state will remind her, well, which hypothesis do you want to believe? But then again, the state did exactly the same thing too, right? So, you know, the state, the investigators are telling Stephen, oh, yeah, the RAV4 came in this way, right? And then Brendan's saying, no, it came through this way. And now, of course, we have the observations of Tom Sawinski saying, no, it was pushed down Avery Road by 2 guys, including Bobby Dassey. So, you know, then you've got Siebert, who said he saw 2 vehicles enter from the quarry way. So which one do you believe?
It's not a matter of which one do you believe. Both of them can be true. It's just what order do they come in. So Kathleen could still be right here when she had this epiphany of what the narrative was versus what she now knows as well. And both of them still could be real. They attempted one way, it didn't work, and then they tried the other way on an alternative date.
Kel, I think you're 100% correct, but I would just like to point out that it is not Kathleen's job to solve the case, even though she told Mama Avery in the episode from last week, I think, that she'd like to solve the case. That's not what her job is. Her job is to raise reasonable doubt in the jury's eyes that it could have been someone else besides her own client. And, she might have this, integrity-driven issue to understand who the real murderer is. But the fact of the matter is, it's just so confusing as to how it may have happened one way, the other way, or both ways. It's not her job. So I guess that to me, that's it's a little bit of a red herring to put that burden on her that she has to come up with the narrative. She can come up with multiple simultaneous narratives, all of whose purpose is to raise reasonable doubt.
And that's a really good point. Both Kelly and Big Jeff, that's a really good point, because what we mustn't forget is the state's narrative, and that is that the RAV4 never left the property, nor Teresa. And the mere fact that there are multiple sightings of the RAV4 and multiple possibilities of how it got at the pit is a concern, right? Because the state is saying that RAV4 never left the property. And quite clearly, the investigator himself told Stephen how that RAV4 got onto the property, which completely now changes the narrative. So all the judge has to do is ask the state, well, how do you explain all of these sightings? So if you've got, as Kelly pointed out, if there are multiple ways of getting that RAV4 at the pit and there are multiple observations, to me, that's troubling for the state.
Yeah, having more potential options. That makes a lot of sense. Having more potential options to foil. Well, it could have happened a lot of different ways, and the state only has one version, right? That is potential. Thank you guys for those comments. I appreciate that. Actually cleared some things up.
Every crime makes sense. Every crime can be unraveled. You can figure it out. You have to understand the victim. You have to understand the nature of the crime, and you must understand in intimate detail the crime scene. And I don't think any of that was done in this case. I mean, you've really got to live the case. You have to be an obsessive kind of personality.
I think Kathleen Zona made a very important point, and I like to really hear what the panel members have to say and people in chat. She said, you have to understand the victim. And I'm sorry, I don't think that was done. A proper, thorough victimology on Teresa Halbach was done. In other words, what were her threats? Who were her potential threats? What about her lifestyle? These are real tough and hard questions. No family member wants to hear. But I'll tell you what, if the FBI profilers were on this case from the get-go, and Jack 61 will back me up on this, that's exactly where they would have started. They would have started with Teresa and worked their way out.
You have to. You absolutely have to start with the victim and work from that small circle and expand it. And it's what, look at what we see today. This Kylie Rodney that just happened. And then before that, Gabby Pinto. And so many of these other cases, they start small and you expand. And they didn't do that at all in these cases. These guys were ignored. These people around her were ignored because their focus was Stephen. And then, of course, eventually Brendan. But
right. It just seems like anything that they started doing, that they started to go through the motions or they started to looking at people, it all stopped the moment that the RAV4 was found.
Oh yeah.
And we mustn't forget, and I still believe that this is a very important point, and I'm sure the panel members will back me up in this. There was an overarching issue here that normally doesn't occur in other murder cases, and that is Stephen had a $36 million civil suit going on at the same time.
Well, that's the big elephant in the room, and they wanted to pop that elephant and get that off the stage, and that's exactly what they did.
Correct. So you can see that there was a sense of urgency to get this solved, and as Jack 61 eloquently put, the investigation really stopped with the RAV4. And as Kelly and I and all of us have discussed multiple times, once you found the suspect's blood in that RAV4 and the victim's blood in the RAV4, to me, party over. And what happened? Stephen got arrested on November the 9th for a gun charge. Later, when it was determined that it was his DNA in that RAV4, then he was charged with the murder of Teresa Halbach, and the civil suit disappeared. So it happened really, really quick.
I have to look at, listen again to what Kathleen said, knowing how everybody here feels. And, we try to, kill these rabbit holes down. But one that I'm still in, and I don't know how we get out of it, really. But this report from Harrington to Fassbender on November 6th, and he tells him about this blunt and bloody instrument. I have to think about this series of events that could have taken place, only at the crime lab, because we're just so not privy to any kind of conversations or report. There was no far as we know, there was no video taken, which is a little surprising to me that they didn't video entering that RAV. It was allegedly locked at the salvage yard. So to me, and having an officer from definitely from Calumet County present, and not only that, maybe a DCI officer present as well, or maybe two, someone to memorialize going into that RAV, how they got into it, what they found, as they found it. The blunt and bloody instrument, whatever the fuck this was, pardon our French, but not really. That changes the nature of everything. But it's now here we are, all these years later, 17 years later, here we are, all these years later, and it wasn't part of the narrative back then. It's hard to insert that now and make it part of the narrative, but it really, I have to accept that it was. People, even these guys, don't just write an affidavit and put that kind of thing in it in a search warrant to get approval for a search warrant without it being true. That's a huge thing, and it just disappears. So what did they do? What were the series of events? I can't explain it. I wanted to throw it in there though.
No, I think you're 100% right, Jack. That it's almost the story of the whole case. There's a sort of a lack of in situ photographs that for a long time, we just thought about it being the bones, but it's at the entering of the RAV as well. So it's critical, right? Now that we know the things that they said were there that they needed to quote unquote go search for, the way that the MO was, the state's method of operation, right, during the Avery trailer search, was they would issue a search warrant at a time to go in for looking for different things. For example, when the key was found, Link and Coburn were operating on a search warrant to uncover pornography. That's why there were so many searches, because each one was carefully crafted out that and let somebody in. I'm going to have a search warrant associated with that, looking for something specific, right? And that's why it makes so much sense what you're saying about the blunt and bloody instrument in the RAV. That they saw it in there, and they, wanted to write a search warrant to make sure to document the fact that it was there, it wasn't planted, et cetera, and now it's nowhere to be found. And what we know now is that they couldn't even be bothered to take a picture before Sherry Culhane swabbed the damn blood swatch near the near the ignition. They couldn't. We have no pictures of what's going on in the RAV even before that. I mean, they once again spoiled the crime scene, with their buffoonery. So what are we supposed to think?
Perfectly said. Spoiled it. And that's how I take it. So therefore, you're operating from a sense of looking at the evidence. You're looking at it wrong because it wasn't captured properly. So,
100% correct. So in other words, the investigators, not only did they change the narrative, they made up the narrative.
That's right.
Because as Big Jeff just said, and Jack 61, normally you would have a video camera there capturing them, taking the swabs, opening up the RAV, documenting the findings of the RAV4. And could you imagine how powerful it would have been if they opened up the back door of the RAV and lo and behold, there's a hammer or there's some blunt metal object with blood on it in the
that
back
damn
of the
tire
RAV.
that damn tire iron laying there with blood all over it. I mean, That's huge.
Yep, because they were looking for an instrument. Remember, they were looking for some type of instrument.
That's right.
In Stephen's garage. So they knew the importance of this particular object. And lo and behold, what do we get? Kathleen Zellner's blood expert showed eloquently, hey, it looks like Teresa Hobart got bludgeoned while she was on the ground and blood got sprayed from this object onto the back door. And that now makes perfect sense because a blunt, bloody object very likely was the object that caused Teresa to be bludgeoned. And you never know. She could have been killed then and there, right? Being hit with some type of heavy metal type of object is going to do untold damage to your skull. And it's very interesting that now it's no longer part of the narrative. You can't find it. No one knows where it is. and yet it was in a search warrant. Now, how do you work that one out?
And we also can't forget that tire iron that I just brought up that Doc was, probably in someone's hand. That tire iron or tire tool that they found did not belong to that Toyota. It was not part of the normal roadside kit. That came from an emergency kit that was not found inside that Toyota, as far as we know. So,
Jack, wasn't that one of her friends, or maybe maybe even Pierce?
Tom Pierce gave her that emergency roadside kit. That's right.
Oh my God, help me, Tom Pierce. Wow.
That's right.
Wow. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So you can clearly now see an alternative narrative, right? And that alternative narrative was that Teresa Horbach had actually left the property, like Stephen Avery said. She was involved in some type of potential collision, causing damage to the blinker light, causing Teresa Horbach to get out of her vehicle and place the blinker light in the back. You have to open up the back door, right? And as she opened up the back door and was standing behind the back door, someone went up behind her and hit her in the back of the head.
Slobbered the hell out of her.
Yep, knocked the hell out of her, spraying her blood on the back door. That whoever it was that hit her, there could have been one, there could have been two people, put her in the back of her own RAV, because we know about the blood that's on the plastic trim part where the wheel well is, and through the blunt bloody object in the back of the RAV, and drove her and her RAV somewhere else. And that's a narrative the state do not want you to even entertain.
I have another question, for not only Doc, the panel, the live people in live chat, and just consider this. It's been talked about before. This is not a new novel thing, but again, it's kind of sitting over here on the side burner for whatever reason. Why didn't they luminol the inside of that fucking car? They didn't do it. Why not?
Well, the problem is that if you do luminol treat, it's going to give you a different narrative, a potentially different narrative.
Absolutely.
It can show micro drops of blood that you may not see with the eye. It may give clues as to how the person or persons got in and out of the RAV4. It can give you information you don't want to know about. And yet, what did the investigators do in the garage? They luminol the hell out of it, right? And found nothing, right? Because luminol is not 100% foolproof. But correct. You would think, hey, Culhane goes in, gets the swabs, then why not luminol? Have a look. Does it tell you a different story? Does it give you a different narrative? Nope, they didn't do it.
I can only imagine that there was a conversation. I don't know that, but especially from the crime lab end of it, somebody there says, "Hey, are we going to spray this car down and see?" And not just inside, because they found blood on the outside of the car, outside as well. Just saying, it could have given them another path to follow, and Doc said it and implied it perfectly. They didn't want to travel that path.
So Dr. Silkman, here's a question from a novice about luminol. If there were more blood, let's assume for a second Stephen Avery is guilty, and he did attempt to clean up the RAV by wiping it up, and he wiped up a lot of his blood, but missed it in many places. I mean, obviously that's a ludicrous narrative. But in those spots where he may have successfully wiped up, or anybody may have successfully wiped off bloodstains, would those appear with luminol, or might it depend on the cleaner, or you just can't get blood off no matter what you do?
You very likely would have seen smears, because the luminol works by picking up the iron in the hemoglobin, right? So you may able to wipe away the blood per se, but if you smear it, you may have a very thin smear of blood, which you may not be able to see with the naked eye. but by spraying on the luminol and then applying a light, you can see like a fluorescence. So you can actually see a smear. So if he's tried to clean down the RAV4 in any fashion, you would have seen a smear. And that's why the luminol treatment of inside and outside of the RAV4 could have been potentially very revealing. Because if Stephen actually went to the hood, right, and was putting his hands on the hood, remember, the state said he was actively bleeding. Well, you may not be able to see it with your naked eye, but luminol could have brought it up, right? So if you've got blood stains and blood spots all over the trunk or the front of the car, the hood of the car, that gives a good indication that someone was rummaging around the front of the vehicle. But the state never did that because I believe Culhane or someone was actually asked, did you actually luminol the RAV? And the answer was, well, we could actually see the blood stains. So they took the blood stains and that was it. So it's a very convenient that, yes, they processed the crime scene, the RAV4, but they did it partially. It wasn't a complete examination, forensic examination of the RAV4. I mean, why not? Why? Because it would have told a story. Imagine, don't forget, bloody Fassbender took off the tarps and it downpoured with rain. Could you imagine if they luminol treated it then and there under the tarp? Lord knows what it could have told them.
Hey, one more fast one. Would that still work even at this late date, or is that biological material gone?
It's very unlikely now that luminol is going to be able to. Look, it's always worth a go, but don't forget, luminol is not 100% foolproof.
Thank you.
There's no better feeling in the world than walking out of prison with someone who's innocent. And when I get in the middle of a case like this, and you'll get to sort of a point where you think, is this going to work? Do we have enough? I need this to work. And then I'll in my mind, I flash all those images of me walking out the door with people, people in 15 years, people in 10 years, just over and over again. I can flash through those where people said, oh, it can't be done. You can't do this. You can't win this. It's ridiculous. So if someone's innocent, you find a way.
We did it, Dr. Silkman. We achieved our goal of finishing.
I still don't believe it. I still don't believe it, Jeff.
That's quite a list there of people that, I'm always amazed when we get to an end of an episode and that comes up and all these people refuse to participate and say their piece.
Well, it's time, that part of the show where we all get to say our piece, and that can only mean one thing, that it's time for Big Jeff to lead off in the wrap-up comments. A lot said, a lot we left on the table, I feel, but that's just how it is.
Yeah, we could have done another 2 episodes on episode 2. Is that right? Is that what you mean? In episode 2, essentially, we get to learn more about Kathleen Zellner, Stephen's new lawyer, who is obviously a person that is driven by integrity. As we could see from that very last clip that we just watched, what she likes to do is imagine herself walking out of prison with somebody who is wrongfully convicted, and she really likes to right that wrong of wrongful conviction, based on some of her early career of being associated with a serial killer whose name I can't remember, but she said to herself she's never going to get put in that position again of having to defend for somebody who's guilty, and her chosen path is wrongful conviction, and she is obviously convinced that. And she must, people parachute into her office to say, oh, my loved one is innocent. She's looked at Stephen's case and she's had her share to look at. And she says it's so obvious that Stephen is innocent that I can't help but take up this case. Right. I stand with Kathleen Zellner. And we talked about in this whole overall episode the brain fingerprinting and some of the evidence. To me, just as the more you watch and the more Kathleen works, the more she dismantles the state's narrative. The only thing the state has is the blood in the ref. And once you get past that, then it's easy to see how the bulk of this evidence was planted and how the state's narrative is absolutely ludicrous. So I stand with Kathleen, and I'm very interested to hear what the rest of the panel has to say.
Yeah, thank you, Big Jeff. Well, all I can say is truth wins, and that's what we want, is the truth. Jack, can you give us your wrap-up comments for today, and even if you want the whole episode too?
A lot of really good comments and conversation, and we can even go off into debate these various other factors that come into play. I'm with Big Jeff. I stand with Kathleen Zellner. She sees it. We see it because we've taken this deep dive and asking questions that cannot be answered, have still not been answered, and they're not small questions. These are huge questions when you're going to take freedom away from two people. You deprived them and locked them in a box, an 8 by 12 box or however. Yeah, it may be a little bit more comfortable now. They've moved them to medium security, but nonetheless, Kathleen's goal is forensics, obviously, dismantling, taking apart, deconstructing a case. And, I see so much now. It's difficult to, specifically look back at this episode because, here, it's dated now. It's like, 4 years old right at it? Or, yeah, right, I guess it is 4 years old. So to completely step away from it, it's kind of difficult. But, yeah, I stand completely where Jeff is with Kathleen. And, yeah, that's where I stand. That's my wrap-up for today.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate that. Dr. Silkman.
I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed the episode, and it was great to discuss various aspects of the case. I just wanted to say that I really do appreciate Kathleen Zellner's approach. The mere fact that she went in situ to the salvage yard, went around the property, had a look at all the main places that the RAV4 potentially could come in, and that she spoke with Earl and Chuck, right? They're the people that lived on the property or worked on the property. And I agree 100% with Jack 61. To really understand what happened, you gotta think like the killer, like the criminals that did this, and try and reconstruct the crime scene. My interest, of course, is in the forensics. And I think that's where we should focus a lot of our attention. And like Jack 61 said, all of us need to explain how that blood got in that RAV4. And quite clearly, from what we've read and what we've discovered, there's another narrative going on here, guys. And it's important to work out why the state didn't want to go down that path. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman. Appreciate that. And Cal, if you wouldn't head us on out of this episode 10.
Everything that's been said kind of sums it up. Basically, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey are innocent, and Kathleen knows what she's doing in terms of what narrative she has to go down strategically to get her foot in the door. And that's literally all I got.
All right. Well, we'll have to wait till next week to hear more from you, Cal, and more from the rest of the panel. But for Dr. Silkman and Kelly and Big Jeff and Jack, this is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.